Welcome to the ISF podcast from the Information Security Forum. The ISF podcast is hosted by ISF CEO Steve Durbin, and every episode he brings listeners features timely conversations, practical insights, and resources for global cybersecurity professionals. I'm producer Tavia Gilbert. In today's episode, Steve and I sit down in person and discuss NIS2 compliance and what this new legislation from the European Union means for the security of your organization. Steve, great to be with you today. I want to have a conversation about the European Union's NIS2, and that is new legislation that is going to be relevant to not all, but many security leaders across the EU. The legislation is already in effect, but EU member states, I understand, have until October 2024 to transpose the directive into national law. So each organization that's encompassed by the directive will be legally obligated to live up to its requirements in just about a year's time. Not a terribly long amount of time, so I want to make sure that people are prepared. Let's start at the beginning. What is NIS2?
Well, NIS2 is a piece of European legislation that imposes much stricter cybersecurity obligations on entities that operate across a variety of critical infrastructure sectors. And the organisations that NIS2 applies to are classified according to their importance and then divided into essential and important categories. Now, it's important, I think, to understand that this legislation is a further development of something that was actually introduced way back in 2016, when the European Union introduced the Network and Information Security, NIS, directive, which set relatively strict cybersecurity requirements for so-called essential companies. So what NIS2 does is it complements and then further extends the directive by designating more companies as being essential. And in total, it's estimated to cover around, or probably about 160,000 or so organisations across Europe.
Who does it affect?
Well, NIS2 applies to any organisation that operates or carries out activities within the EU that provide what's considered to be an essential service to consumers.
What sectors is it actually going to apply to?
Well, it's relatively broad. It's internet providers, energy suppliers, drinking water companies, waste processors, banks, as you would expect,
right,
transporters, healthcare institutions, and then slightly different, it also includes factories that produce food or major household items.
Steve, anything you want to share about which organizations NIS2 does not apply to?
Yeah, there's a few. I mean, there are some exceptions that it's worth mentioning. So not every small company is going to be included in this, because there is actually a size cap. Now, that's not been clearly defined yet, but it's expected to be something like 10 million euros in annual turnover or fewer than 50 employees. I think the other thing it's worth saying about NIS2 is that, as with other EU legislation, GDPR, for instance, it does have some teeth. So organisations could be fined. At the moment, that's looking like fines of up to 10 million euros, or, again, not dissimilar from some of the other legislation we've seen coming out of the EU, a percentage of the total annual global turnover for failure to comply. And so we're probably looking at about 2% in this instance. The other piece, though, which is really applicable, is that individuals with relevant cybersecurity authority or indeed management roles, they could also be held personally responsible for non-compliance. And that's a little bit of a shift in some of the legislation that we've recently seen.
Yeah, really. What is NIS2's goal?
Well, the directive is really simple. I mean, it's intended to strengthen the security requirements for companies by imposing a risk management approach and outlining the core cybersecurity measures that all companies must implement that are covered by the directive.
The organizations that NIS2 is going to apply to, how are they expected to respond to the legislation?
Well, we get into here a little bit around the sort of maturity of the company. So depending on that maturity, there are principally 4 areas, I would say, that need to be addressed in order to protect and to be able to demonstrate. And that's the important piece. It's about demonstration of critical infrastructure and compliance with the directive. So it's, as you'd expect, training and awareness, it's incident reporting, it's the overall security posture,
right,
and also the funding of cybersecurity, which again may surprise some people.
Yeah.
Specifically, there are 7 measures that people need to be really paying attention to. So again, risk. So really looking at the risk analysis and the information system security policies that are in place. Incident handling, you would hope that will be in there, but it's things like prevention, detection, as well as the response. So it's looking at it fairly broadly. Business continuity, of course, and crisis management. We've been doing a lot of work in that particular space this last 12 months. The supply chain, you'd hope that would be in there.
Right.
It seems to be in most things these days.
Yeah.
Network and information system security, again, nothing too surprising there. And then the last 2, it's policies and procedures for cybersecurity risk management and the use of cryptography and encryption, because of course that's quite prevalent in some of the industries that we've just been talking about as well.
Right. I'm wondering if you have an opinion about NIS2. What do you think about it?
Well, I think that you know, if you're an ISF member and you're listening to this, then the important thing to point out is that nothing that we've just been talking about is going to come as a surprise.
Right.
So if you have implemented things like the ISF Standard of Good Practice, you've been doing benchmarking, you've been conducting things like risk assessments, then you're going to be in pretty good shape. So not too much to worry about perhaps when it comes to NIS2. But it does mean that organisations have to implement and be shown to be implementing business continuity and specifically crisis management capabilities, because that is discussed repeatedly across NIS2. And there's a special emphasis as well on what's termed the timely reporting of incidents. So again, not unlike the GDPR,
Right.
it's, you know, you have to be able to report within the first 24 hours, follow that up within the next 72, and so it goes on. So again, for any organisation that's been operating across Europe, probably nothing out of the usual or that you wouldn't expect to see in this. The concern that I have with it is not perhaps restricted just to NIS2, but it's the current landscape, if you like, for compliance and regulation in general. And my concern is that we are continually introducing legislation which is increasing the burden not just on the organisation, but on specific individuals, so the C-suite in particular.
Right.
And you do have to question just how much more you can reasonably expect individuals to be able to understand when it comes to some of these things, because you can't look at it in isolation. So we've got GDPR, we've got NIS2, we've got the EU working on their AI Act, and those are just 3 examples off the top of my head. There's many, many more of those. So I don't know what the answer is. I'm just expressing a concern that we seem to be asking more and more people to observe compliance.
Right.
Some might think that's a good thing. I think the more you move into compliance, doesn't necessarily make for good security, so we just need to pay attention to that. I mean, I would hate for this to turn into a tick box exercise, frankly, that really does miss the point.
Right. Well, it sounds like ISF members are probably going to be well prepared to bring this into their organizations. They've been thinking about these areas of oversight for some time, but is there anything specific about how ISF is going to help with this particular legislation? Yeah,
sure. So we have a fairly specialised readiness assessment that's been tailored to ensure that organisations can demonstrate that they're ready for NIS2. The whole point of that is we want to be able to give organisations confidence in their ability not just to comply, but to then manage that compliance over the life of the NIS2 directive, which will be for the foreseeable future. So the readiness assessment, and you won't be surprised to hear this, is built upon the Standard of Good Practice framework. So that, you know, allows us to align the requirements with other major cybersecurity frameworks as well, like ISO and NIST, irrespective actually of the framework that an organisation wants to adopt. So it's a fairly flexible approach to it. And I suppose the important piece is that running this readiness assessment is going to help enterprises to understand how the NIS2 directive applies to them, quickly get a clear view on their ability to comply, and perhaps most importantly, identify gaps for remediation that, of course, the ISF can help with.
Right, right. Well, I appreciate you bringing us up to date about NIS2, about the reasons for its emergence, about its requirements, the pretty serious risks if enterprises don't make it a priority, and how the ISF can support its members and non-members in implementing it seamlessly. So I appreciate your time today. I know our listeners will too. And it's great to be with you, as always.
No, nice to have the opportunity to talk about something slightly different.
Yeah, thank you.
At present, ISF is collaborating with our members across global business, government bodies, legislators, and cybersecurity experts to provide trusted resources that will help organizations meet the requirements of the NIS2 directive by October 2024. So be sure to keep listening and follow us on LinkedIn so that you're first in line to access ISF's insights around this topic. ISF members, be sure to log in to ISF Live to access all of our comprehensive research, reports, and tools related to these conversations. And to our listeners who want to become an ISF member, get in touch with your regional representative at securityforum.org/join. We'll be back soon with another valuable conversation. And in the meantime, be sure to check out the ISF Analyst Insight podcast, which goes in-depth on the hottest topics in information security. The ISF podcast is produced by Talkbox and Tavia Gilbert, with senior producer Katie Flood. Mix and master by Kayla Elrod. Music by Alexander Filipiak. Thanks for listening.